You're tuned in to the Data Masters podcast. In each episode, we dissect the complexities of data management and discuss the data strategies that fuel innovation, growth, and efficiency. We speak with industry leaders who share how their modern approaches to data management help their organizations succeed. Let's dive straight into today's episode with Anthony Dayton.
Welcome back to Data Masters. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Chris Tabb. Chris is the co-founder and chief commercial officer of LEIT Data, one of EMEA's fastest growing data consultancies. With an impressive 30 years experience spanning BI, data architecture, and enterprise analytics, Chris has seen the evolution of our industry firsthand. He started his career at Cognos in the 1990s and has worked through almost every layer of the data ecosystem since. Beyond his strategic work driving business value and advising startups, he's also a fellow podcaster hosting the Data Value Show, which I encourage everyone to go listen to. Today, we're going to dive into how our careers have shifted upstream from BI to raw data, why we need to rethink traditional ROI to more build smarter business cases, and finally, we're going to demystify the context layer, what it is, how it keeps organizations from falling into the chasm of inaccuracy. Chris, great to have you on the show.
Well, what an intro that as well, being called a master to start with, and then all the rest of it. I've even forgotten how much I've done over the years. So thank you very much for the intro. It's great to be here. Yeah, so the beginning, should we start there, really?
Yeah, so in a funny way, I think as we were preparing for this, I think we both noted that we have, in that sense, similar career trajectories, having both started on the consumption side of the data. You started at Cognos, I started at Click. And let me relay a story, if you don't mind. I just got back from the Gartner Data and Analytics Summit in Orlando. In the initial introduction that the Gartner analysts do on stage, at some point early in that presentation, they said something like, isn't everybody sick of dashboards? And the entire room erupted into applause and cheering. And it was just an absolute moment where I was like, oh my goodness, like the where we started our careers around helping people consume and use data more effectively, is that era is very much over. And everything has really shifted back in the value chain to the data that supplies those. So I'm curious, I suppose if you agree, and or are dashboards still relevant?
Yeah, and I just triggered a thought. I just make a note because otherwise they pop in and out of my mind. But a little while ago, I did a view of what UI would look like in the future. I said UI is just going to be a prompt box, and forget, with dashboards and the rest of it, that will be our interaction with it. And I was right on this occasionally. It happens occasionally. But we were doing a lot of stuff with ThoughtSpot back then. And that was their sort of tagline back then, dashboards are dead. And I think first we define what a dashboard is. If a dashboard is a static bit of information that there is no business decision being made of, yes, it is just a pretty picture. It's no more than that. But if that dashboard is driving business decisions, and the business processes are being driven off those dashboards, then they're not dead. I think it's how they're being used. And a prompt now can create your dashboard that you go and make the decision on. So again, I think it was a bit of a marketing thing. Anyone that's put a nice little AI front end on their original dashboard in product, they're going to go down that route. So I think it depends. Everything needs to be driving a business process or a decisioning process. Otherwise, it's just a bit of nice chartish.
No disagreement, but there's a sort of second dimension to this, which is maybe we could even say, whether it's a prompt interface or a dashboard interface, it's kind of a solved problem. But what isn't a solved problem is the underlying data itself.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that, and I think part of what people were reacting to, I think, in that moment was this overemphasis on the visual presentation of the data and a lack of emphasis on the actual data
Yep.
itself. I'm curious if that resonates.
I just triggered another thought. I remember back in my BI developer days, I probably spent more time getting the legends in a particular format, or the colors on the charts and mapping to what the user would want, than probably the data preparation itself. So, and I think that's gone back to the point was we were delivering this for people that used to have PowerPoint charts. So they wanted to report what they were used to, which is the same problem we have with Excel as well. So there's a slightly different story, but yeah. So that I think there was too much on the how it looks in the presentation rather than what we're going to do with this and how accurate is it, and also what's the next question I'm going to ask if I look at that. Oh, great, but why is that more? Well, why has that increased more? What is the difference? What changes have happened during that period? Why is the number of customers increased 100% in the past 2 weeks where that couldn't be possible? We did a migration. It's those sort of questions that the prompt approach or that iterative sort of analysis of that data, that is not the question you want to ask first of all. It's actually the fourth question you didn't know you want to ask that is actually going to provide you the value. And I think where we are now and where we're going, we are able to provide the ability for people to ask these questions and get those. But how much trust is there in that particular response? Everyone's like AI hallucinate. Why am I going to trust the information there? And they're right to have some concerns, but this is why you need to make sure that it's set up in a way that there's no way of it actually creating these mistakes, because you've already built all the business logic and usage of that data and context, even though maybe I shouldn't use that word too early in this podcast, but yeah, to make sure that it is writing accurate SQL that you would have written yourself back in the day, and it's providing you consistent answers that would be the same if another person in another department is asking similar question of the same data set, but it's always going to correlate. You're never going to get that boardroom where someone's going to say, our net revenue this month was this, and someone's going to say, no, it was this.
Right. Yeah. I used to have this thing I would say, because it would be very common for customers to complain about the quality of the data in their dashboard. And I would say, no, you don't need to worry about that, because by sunlight is the best disinfectant. By putting the data in the dashboard, then people will be caused to go fix the data, which admittedly, looking back on it, I think is a lie. That might be a bit strong, but it was an oversimplification, maybe a more generous way of saying it. But I'm curious, as you've moved in your career and now finding yourself on the advising side of the business, do you feel like that's given you a kind of freedom to say different things to customers? And do you find yourself saying different things because you're not sort of beholden to?
So I think from going back to the career I've been on, and probably why I've either stayed. Well, people liked me, and I kept. And I've worked with many people in the same place over and over again. I say what I think and I say what I believe, rather than what they would want to hear. And I think being a contractor, so I've had 2 permanent jobs. One at Cognos, one is the one I employ myself now within the company. And between those 25 years, or no, maybe 20 odd years, I was a guns for hire contractor. And I went there because I wanted to put have the best approach to the best solution. I had no ulterior objective, my career path there, or not accepting a boss, or the fact that if you didn't like it, I know I'd go somewhere else, because I knew I could. I had the confidence knowing that I wouldn't be short of work based on this stuff. Well, based on the historical experience. So and again, being in your home company as well, and I have to answer people. I have a chairman, he makes sure that I do the right. I have a CFO that makes sure I do the right thing there. But from an advisory to a client, I do like sort of sales, but I say part of my pitch, I'm a architect first, a salesperson second. I can only sell you something I can believe in. And that I wouldn't. Yeah, maybe that's not the approach I've taken. I think that's being recognized, and that advice is taken seriously because it's not driven by any ulterior motive. Obviously, I need to make money, but I think giving the right advice actually aids that rather than not. And I think the other thing to mention is I still do. I'm probably more hands-on than I have been in many years now with regards to building stuff. So, I'm doing R&D. We're building up frameworks. I've built my prompt engines to do internal optimization. The learning I've taken from that, I give back to clients and I say, look, and I'll say, I built a system of context. That's another thing, which is on top of all my system of records. So it's able to be my one portal that actually I can see where anything's going on in the business, and it's driven by AI. It is in the right place. And that's brilliant. I think to mention is using things for using the right tool for the right job is also very.
So speaking of tools,
Yes.
I think, and I know you hosted an entire podcast on this, I did want to touch on this question of business value and ROI.
Yeah.
I do feel like you are a kind of world expert in this area. And I also think this is arguably one of the most challenging pieces of the software space when it comes to data software, data and analytics software. Building the business case. I feel like a large proportion of the sales process, of the prospect engagement process, is helping data teams build that case almost internally. Like they're bought in, but they don't know how to speak the language of business to get the business side to sort of buy into it. So maybe share a little bit on I know you have a very thoughtful framework around this.
Yeah.
How do you think about this?
So I'll tell you a story about the ROI. What's ROI and why it always annoyed me. So I was working I was head of architecture or something at a fintech company, and the marketing department, CMO, we both went with our presentations. The CMO was putting a proposal for Salesforce. We put in to do this, to do that. It had 50 times X value in customer retention, this, all these things. I went there with my proposal, which I wasn't asking for nowhere near as much money as they needed to put in Salesforce, but I was evidencing probably a modest but valuable return, which would have actually unlocked other things later. So it was foundational that it would have paid for itself and a little bit more, but then you could actually do use case 3, 4, and 5 after. Anyway, I lost. I didn't get it, and I was there long enough to see the Salesforce project fail miserably and cost a load of money and return no value. And if you'd hedged your bet and just give me a bit of chump change, I think that they would have been in a better place. But I didn't go full smug mode and tell them so, but I think they all knew. And so let's step forward to the term business value. And probably about 3 years ago, I started using it, and we mentioned Joe Reese and Matt Halsey did a book called the Fundamentals of Data Engineering on O'Reilly. Yeah, very good book. I mean, you see my name at the beginning. I didn't have a foreword on it, but been talking to them, and me and Matt were going on a journey. We're going to try and do some book on. We never actually made it, but we're going to do a book on it. So we did a lot of thinking, and we were hung up just on what the definition of business value was for a long, long time. And the thing we both agreed on in the end, and a lot of debates with other people over a few beers, over a few months, was it was a positive evidence effect on your business objective. So it was never about the bottom line, because it's not always about the bottom line. It may be on the by second degree, but maybe not directly. And the reason why I say that is, and I give this example, Uber never made a profit for 10 years. So was the objective of anything they did to actually adjust the bottom line this year? No. Next year? No. So hopefully maybe years 3 or 4, but it wasn't the case. So the value there is it's customer retention. It's actually acquiring new areas, not actually about making additional profit or bottom line at that point. And there could be some eco sort of thing you want to do, is making sure you're carbon neutral. Again, not actually directly make it, but it's past your business objectives that you agreed to your shareholders. So that's when we got to, okay, what's business value? So since then, I've taken, and we're using this now in a few clients, taking this to the next level of, okay, how do you provide business value to a client that is evidential? So the approach we take is the friction approach. Okay, so you've got, actually I might include a third one, but let's keep it simple for now as 2. You've got business friction and delivery friction. So what is friction? Friction is a time, complexity, and effort to perform an activity compounded by frequency, how often that thing happens. If you're able to look at the business processes, and this could be via a combination of interviews, log mining, looking at the UI flow, and multiple mechanisms to get the metadata or associated information, to start to understand where there is business friction, where there is optimization that could happen, or processes that backwards and forwards between 2 teams that could be solved with something simple. So then that's your business friction. Then your delivery friction is, how long does it take you to get something into production? So, and engineers love engineering things. Okay, so you go there, look at our backlog. Oh, we're going to change this. I've done this all in. I've written it all in some scripting language now. That means I know you do this bit of infrastructure, and it's automated. Brilliant. How often do we do that? Well, every 3 months we might have it done. How long does it take you? Half a day? Okay. Right. So how long does it take you to do it? What's it on the back then? Okay, right. There is no value, and that is a vanity project, or an engineering driven project, not a quantifiable project that is actually linked to business value. So the other part we put into this now is referred to as force multiplier. So if you can identify a force multiplier, which is something that is either reusable, so basically it becomes a reusable asset, or a force multiplier is the amount of effort you need to put in to the value you get from it is you get more. So I think I had a little I think I called it the Millennium Fulcrum. I called it, because there was a fulcrum point. Yeah, a Star Warsy theme thing, but it was basically the effort and load. So typical sort of physics. Not I'm a specialist on this, but if you move the fulcrum, and you move that fulcrum with automation, it means the effort you put in here is a lot less to lift the load on the other side. So identifying where in the business world or in that delivery world, force multipliers, you solve it for once, or the effort you need to do it next time, you get the same value, or say more return from it. You can now plot a evidenceable business value roadmap that is iterative. And if you look at these things and you work out, okay, right, yes, there's a lot of value in this, but it's really hard to do. Okay. So now I've got all of the information there to start having the right discussions with the right people in the business, and taking out emotion and any maybe these vanity projects, and say, okay, let's do this stuff in the right order. Yes, you get to build your nice fancy framework. We need that next year. Right? That's a year 2 objective, because by then we need it, because we want to spin up more of these things quicker, because we're opening up another product line then. So we don't need it now. So yeah, business value. Although I just think, we actually had the force multiplier discussed anyway. So if you get all the right information and package that up, and internally what we have as well, we have a platform blueprint, and which link on to the context layer in a minute actually, but and that platform blueprint is a technology agnostic, functional domain component, and that will give you everything you may need at one time, but you may not need it today. And we've got some knowledge and some bit of knowledge engineering we've done. We know which components are grouped together, maybe could solve by a particular product. If you go with that, then you solve multiple pieces of it. But you're not putting in, I'm building a snowflake with a stigma and a Tamar in it. Well, actually, you're doing a bit of data quality, you're doing a data app, and you've got a data wrong. And we've been always been making that same mistake many, many times by describing the technology and actually not what the functionality is. And then it makes it very hard to swap things out later because there's no abstraction from it. So using our blueprint and using our frameworks that we have underneath these things of best practice for each of them, we can, with a little bit of effort, working with a client, provide them something that's driven by what they need, not driven by a technology, a roadmap that we're implementing on them, and doing things in the right order that keeps the stakeholders happy, that keeps them on board for that journey, because you're not going to keep them all happy all the time. You've got to keep the right people happy at the right time and eventually get to everyone at one point. So lots of unpack there, probably. I just want to
one of the big ideas that I took away from the Gartner show last week in Orlando, one of the Gartner analysts made this point that every data project should start by the team that's working on it reading their annual report. And
yes.
What would that have anything to do with this? But his point, and it speaks exactly to what you're talking about, is if you don't understand the business objectives of the business, then whatever data project you're working on is likely to be a technology project and not a business project.
Spot on. In fact, I've done that whenever going and pitching for a data strategy piece. About the first place I go is to their last board report or their any publicly specified. I've actually built that into our knowledge platform internally, that we actually have all that research done on a company before I'm even talking to them. So, but before I'm talking to them, I've already had the background and what's going on with them. So I have all the context needed when I have the conversation.
And then I also really love this idea of friction. I think that is a really unique insight. And just to play it back to you, I think one idea there that's really important is there almost certainly lots of pain points inside an organization, lots of points of friction. But friction in something that's not actually moving very quickly, to your point, something that happens every 3 months, even if it's very painful every 3 months, it's only every 3 months. Whereas something that's happening 6 times a day, even if it's not that much friction, but there's a huge, not to overuse the analogy, but there'd be a huge heat buildup in that because it's just.
Yeah, so you either have to chuck more oil on it, which is more people to try and smooth the process, or you reduce that friction. You put something in there that solves the problem. That's not a.
And then this idea of, so in your view, I like this idea of the force multiplier, but I'm curious, is that something that's typically human led, meaning the force multiplier is people, or is the force multiplier technology?
Do you know what? I think it could be any of them. I think the force multiplier. So say, for example, let's get the people route. It could be the fact that at the moment you've got 3 people doing this particular activity as a part-time job, and the value that they have doing other things is more valuable. It could be solved by just putting one person that does that thing, that's dedicated to that serves those other 3. You've just solved it as a people. So it could be as simple as that. It'd just be more efficiency with the staff you've got, or better structure of your teams. Next one, it could be the deployment framework. Okay, so basically, normally you've got someone that goes and runs a script here, does that, and someone else does the testing. So now you've got them built an end-to-end testing framework that runs it, sends them a Slack message with the results saying done. You've just saved. You've put it on two things. One, you save them some time, but you've also built more trust in the process, because there's less likely for it to fail. And you solve that process for that one department. You've now got a force multiplier. That is, every other department that's doing this can now benefit from that. You solved it for once, you got more benefit. And I think the business process one is, okay, so for example, you've got master data scattered all over the place, and now you're your hand, but you're back here is a bit, and that was, unintentional. But having that now centralized in one particular place means that the information is more accurate. You're not paying for multiple systems that actually were doing this in the first place, and you've got it in a more timely manner. So it has become a thought. How you identify that is by your process of doing this analysis of looking for areas of friction. You would have identified that these three departments are all using us. One's got Salesforce, one's got HubSpot. At some point, maybe you would go and centralize into one center. Maybe not. So maybe there's an opportunity to go, okay, right, I can't get rid of all you, but for now, I'm going to master this in one location. That is the golden source. Anyone needs to go and get the latest thing for that. Everything feeds via that hub now. And now, you've got to solve that for your billing department, your finance, and your marketing department, that are now, not sending marketing material out when people haven't paid their bills. There's no point trying to market stuff that people can't buy in the first place.
So I think that's a good transition to context layers, which again, if there was a third theme that came out of the Gartner show, it was this the buzzword context layer, which we'll give you credit. You've been talking about for some time. I don't know if you can quite claim to have invented it, but you should claim to have invented it.
I did a bit of perplexity research to find out who was the first person to talk about it. And
yes,
it was keeping me happy, but it couldn't find other people talking about it before that. But I'll tell you where I originally coined it and why I coined it. Sure. And it wasn't to invent a buzzword. And it's linked to the good old days of BI. And, we had, in Cognos, you had a catalog. In business objects, you had a universe. You were a semantic layer. And it was a bundled semantic layer with a BI. I didn't know it was a semantic layer then. All I knew, it was a catalog that I was describing my data, and I just did it. But it's interesting to see evolution now, and where we are. We were talking about these things again. And there was something semantic 2.0, and then they would do a whole list of all of these things that I'd say are context related. It was talking about ontologies. It was talking about knowledge graphs, vector databases, semantic layers, semantic 2.0, and so and it was people arguing. I said, look, what are they all providing? They're providing context. Collectively, they are a context layer. And back to that blueprint or our reference architecture, I can now know how long it's been there, because I haven't updated it over a year now. Well, I haven't updated that part for over a year. And I have this thing called a context layer. And again, that was the purpose of that, was to describe to the business what capabilities, and it wasn't a product, it wasn't a solution, it was a concept. And it was to try and say that all these things you're hearing about, they are part of the jigsaw puzzle of providing you the context as needed with your use cases. But you don't need all of them at once, and you probably don't need them all. You probably won't need all of them at all, and it's working out what you need at the right time. And then I think I put in there something called context management. And I've done this in my prompt engine I have. my prompts are stored afterwards and run, but they also store the context that they've been given as well. And it gives feedback if that context isn't, or if it believes the context is the reason for the bad result for the prompt. So that hierarchical, it will go around, it will tune itself to go and say, what additional context would I needed not to perform hallucination work. So context, you need to manage context, okay? And context will mean different things to different people. And also context has got a lifespan as well. I think people really need to unpack what they actually need for context for them. And if context just is, you've now stored all your additional metadata on your DDL with comments or tags or with foreign key, primary key constraints or naming conventions, you've built context into that by design. Then you're able to know you can read that and actually extract knowledge from that context, and it will always be kept up to date. So you don't need to go and have another. Again, if your business processes, you're capturing that, and you've got some naming convention, you put that in, and those business processes are linked to your data model that you may have somewhere that is also linked. You've actually just created all that metadata already. That's providing you context. You don't need to buy a product. You don't need anything else. You need to put that somewhere and actually be able to use that and stick some agents at it, sort of agentic stuff. It'll work out what it can do with all of that context you arrived at. And then you just need to make sure that is available to the purpose you've got. And it could be to a prompt. You want to make sure that you're giving the right context to the prompt that's being. It could be we're talking about the prompt box where you're doing reporting now. You need to make sure the example I gave earlier. So we've just done a migration. Right? By the way, here's a history of activities that have gone on recently, or there was an outage on this in this region at that time. Those things that if you just get, that's going to be useful for someone doing this reporting. Just getting that sent somewhere that that when you've got your analysis being performed, it's all to have access to that additional context. You're just providing additional value and also providing additional trust in that data, because as soon as they see something wrong, I know why it's wrong. Oh, it knows why it's wrong.
One thing I just want to go back a little bit. You made this point that this is something that as an industry, we've had for a long time. And in that sense, I think in our consumer lives, we're quite comfortable with it. We often talk about, what Google has is a lot of context. And I think a lot of what Google was trying to do in making search better was learn or figure out the context. Sometimes it can get creepy in our personal world, but leaving that aside for a moment, would it be fair to say that we could learn a lot from the way our experience with consumer software informs the way we need to make these enterprise systems successful, especially in the context of context?
Yeah, I think I'm going to answer this, but something else we need to talk about recently is a system of record. And you've seen recently Salesforce price crash, HubSpot crash. And that was, and something I've seen as well, that was based on behavior of the businesses now, whereas before that system of record was the go-to place that they drove everything from. Now it's not so. They were taking that information out of there and then performing that analysis side of Salesforce, which meant maybe the number of licenses they needed before weren't as high, because people could go and self-serve on this data doing, I know that Sigma are doing this, and on top of that, you can't take that data real time, but you can take it batch. So that's sort of like, I think, a shift now from where we were before of the system of records being the big golden pillars of an organization system. And you may have seen that Salesforce has recently changed their licensing agreement that you cannot train AI. Well, I don't know how they're implementing it, but you can't train your models on your data in their platform. So maybe I think you can take it out and train it, but that just shows that they realize that context is where the money is, and if they lose that context and it's being taken outside the platform, they're losing their value.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'm, did I answer your question?
Yes, exactly. And I think this goes to a theory I've had for many years, which is that what happens in enterprise software is what happened in consumer software 5 years ago. And
Yes.
And to your point about the operational systems, where I think a lot of organizations saw value in these operational systems, they're increasingly seeing value in the linkages between these operational systems and not so much in the, and I'll say this in a funny way. There used to be this idea that eventually all the data will end up in whatever, SAP, Salesforce, whatever the system, your choice of systems is. And I think there's this increasing realization that that's never going to happen. They're just not going to end up in one place.
Yeah, which I think where this system of context, as I coined it, Gartner will talk about this next year. You can say you heard it here first. But yeah, the system of context is stringing together all of those different parts of your organization, and it's much easier to bring it all together now, which it's always been there, but it's been very, very difficult to do.
Yeah.
So, before it was data platforms were downstream. It was never seen to be, an operational thing. And I think now that's shifted. And if your data platform is fund your operational or provides an operational, and then all the systems are feeding, system of record are feeding into it, your system of context sits on top of it because it understands everything, because everything's going into it. And I think it's the sum of all of the parts that are worth more than the individual pieces. And I think the data world has got that now. Whereas, the Salesforces, they're all trying to get it into their platforms.
Which brings us sort of back to where we started, which is the value is no longer in this very specific bespoke user interface, a dashboard, or for that matter, a CRM system, but in fact, in the data behind it. And then in fact, the context that data provides, whether it provides it to humans or AI systems.
I coined something else a few years ago, which was metadata. So basically now it's data about the data is where the value is now. And and that links into, that's providing additional context. I mean, people tried to do this years ago. You take the ETL metadata, you take your database it was difficult, and it's not now. You go and stick some agents on top of that, it can work it out quite quickly.
Yeah,
and you can get some really valuable insight from it. We're doing that. Not really everything, but that's something else we're doing elsewhere.
Well, look, I think we've covered a lot of ground, both between the transformation in the data space away from how we visualize data to the actual data itself, to how we can use a different concept than ROI, but think about, I love this idea of friction as a motivating factor, and really introducing this idea of the context there, which arguably is where we're going as an industry.
Yes.
So, Chris, thank you so much for the time.
No, thank you for listening. I've got a lot to talk on this stuff. So,
thanks for joining us for the latest episode of the Data Masters podcast. You'll find links in the show notes to any resources mentioned on today's show. And if you're enjoying our podcast, please subscribe so you never miss an episode.